It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
So my friends, you see them on the highway every day, repairing roads, making new roads, construction. It's called the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation Workers. Today, folks, we're going to try to give you an insight of what happens with, #1, the development of projects, how they start, and what's actually going on the highways today, okay? I know myself, you're going down, all of a sudden you're backed up and you're frustrated and you pass and you see these different things happening and you wonder how come it's tying up traffic, etc. And there's a whole array of things, but I don't think we're going to cover every issue that PennDOT has, but today we have some interesting people on the show. Construction, we have James May, who is the Regional Press Director, and we have Karen Mervine, who is a consultant for PennDOT. A lot of interesting things she's going to tell you about. And we have Chris Tomaszewski, who is the District Liaison Engineer, and coming on the show because Contractors Part 2 of this show. But let me start with you, James. Everyone knows you. They see you on television. You're on more than I am.
And as many times as I've been down here to the station, this is my first time on your show.
Yeah.
So
aren't you lucky?
Good to be here with you finally.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, coming on the show and you're always giving as much information as possible, you begin to learn a lot more about, what you do in PennDOT, okay? And I'm really getting an education today, the little bit the time we spent together. But, a little bit about, when we're talking about road projects, okay? How do these things originate? I mean, how do you know that you're going to come do a major project? And we'll talk a little bit about the South Valley Parkway, which we'll show, and all of the intricacies that's involved with that. How do these things evolve?
Well, a lot of people will say to me that, they'll say, I used to be in the military, and so I remember we could drop a bridge in Vietnam in a weekend, and why does it take PennDOT, 5, 10, 20 years to do something like this? And then the other question they have is, why do we pick the projects that we pick to work on? And so I think Chris will probably be really the expert on talking about the details of what we get into, but there is a process, and we work a lot with your local elected officials. There's a transportation board that is comprised of business leaders, elected officials, and they're the ones who are really looking out and saying, what are the needs moving forward? And many times they'll look at not just what roads need to be fixed. Sometimes our job at PennDOT is to take what's broken and try to fix it or try to maintain it. Other times it's to take what's not broken and simply to maintain it so it doesn't get broken. But other times, and the South Valley Project is an example of this, sometimes our job is to say, what can we be doing for the community? Is there a need for economic development? Is there a safety concern maybe that we have? Is there a traffic problem that needs to be alleviated? And so we might look at issues like that and say, well, this isn't just a road that we need to fix, this isn't just a bridge that we need to make sure we maintain, but we need to actually look at looking forward and being proactive, not just reactive. And so that's the why behind why we do some of these things.
Does it start with input from the community? In other words, if you're going down the road to say, well, there should be a light here, are you responsible for lights as well? Putting lights
the local municipality is primarily responsible for traffic signals. Okay. And so we work primarily with them. And I always say that people, when there's a real local election, your township supervisors, your local council, people don't really pay that much attention to those elections. But in many ways, those are the ones that impact you the most because they're the ones that we work with. A local municipality may come to us and say, we want a traffic study done to determine if we should have a stop sign here or a traffic signal. We want the timing on this traffic signal different. Those are the men and women who we work with directly. And before we do a project, we always work with them to make sure, what is the impact on the school district? Is there a local fair that about, a community fair that we need to be aware of? And so we work directly with the local elected officials, and that's why that's so important to make sure that you know who those men and women are because they really have the most input on what projects we're doing and the timeline and what exactly we're doing. We always look to them for input.
Well, I'm glad you said that because we stress that every year when the elections are out there. It's so important to make sure you put the right people in there because you're going to be working with them. Okay, so I'm going to go. I'm not going to skip. I'm skipping you right now, Karen. But I want to go to Chris Tomaszewski. Now, Chris, you are the District Liaison Engineer. Okay, so what does that mean?
That basically means I manage projects with the design consultants through the whole design process. and basically.
So you do nothing, you know?
I wish that was the case.
We got a promotion to do nothing.
Right?
Wow, this sounds complicated.
It is very complicated. It's called the project development process. Each project goes through an entire process just to get a project out the door and in the hands of a contractor and out to see
Okay, so let me start.
fruition.
So you get the project. In other words, the project's been approved.
Correct.
Okay, and then here, like for example, South Valley Parkway. Okay, here's your project, Chris. Okay,
Yes.
so what do you do from that point in time?
First thing that we'll do if it's a large project such as South Valley Parkway, we hired a design consultant. We go through the whole process of hiring a consultant. In this case, Borton Lawson Engineering was the designer. Then we basically start into early preliminary engineering, it's called, which involves scoping field views and just to get the whole aspect of what this project's going to entail. And then we move through the whole process from there on out. I don't know if you want me to go through the more in detail.
Because
but,
it's interesting, how you're getting the project, and then there's a reason for that project, as James said. Okay, so there's a reason for that project, and you know what you want to accomplish. All right, so then you take it, and then you're actually fractionizing it and bringing it into different designs and on top of the project, correct?
Correct, right, correct. So, such as the South Valley Parkway project, the first thing we start is surveys are done. And then from surveys, lines are put on.
Surveys in what respect?
Surveys, you have your surveyor out there getting the topo of the area, of the land that's surrounding the project.
You've already know how many cars pass and trucks, and you already have that information.
No, we start developing all that during this time
But they know
period.
they need a project.
Yes.
Okay, so now
Yes.
you're doing the individual surveys. Okay.
Correct. From there, we start basically put lines on the paper and start drafting up different alignments. For South Valley Parkway, I think we came up with maybe 7 or 8 different concepts to where it would, where would have the least impact to the traveling public, where would be least impact to the environment. And just to see where's the best fit for the new roadway that we're developing. If it's a bridge, it's pretty straightforward because we're just going to replace the bridge right in the same location. But for South Valley Parkway, it gets into bigger studies. Environmental studies are very time consuming, and it's a part of the process that we take very seriously, and we work with our local agencies such as DEP, Fish and Boat Commission, Army Corps.
Of the environmental things that you had to be concerned about, being that we're using the South Valley Parkway as an example, what were some of the environmental issues that you had to address?
So since this was such a large project, we look at, is there any historic districts, any historic buildings in the area? Then we go into, is there a possibility that this area was never touched? So maybe there might be some archaeology to look into. There's always areas when they're along streams and creeks, wetlands. We have to study the wetlands. We don't want to negatively impact any wetlands. And then it goes into threatened and endangered species. If we place a new road in this area, are we going to impact an endangered species, which in this case for South Valley Parkway, there was a threatened and endangered species. There was 3 types of bats that were determined to be within the area of this project.
So it's detailed, isn't it?
It's very detailed.
It's very
yes.
detailed. All right, so now...
And Sam, and that ends up having an impact throughout the entire project. And I know when you talk with the contractor before, they can address this, but even people say, why don't we work at night? Well, the study that was done on the bats, we determined there's some endangered bats there. That ends up having an impact where you can't work at night, you can't have lights out there because there's these endangered bats that they found.
It's amazing.
The wetlands, we did impact wetlands, and that had to be, we had to actually build new wetlands elsewhere because the ones that we were doing away with, we had to replace them somewhere else. So, what's taking place here is important, but then it has implications throughout the entire process. Like this process started, what, in 1999?
1999.
So it's
Correct.
been almost 20 years, and that's the process that it goes through, and it has an impact throughout the entire process through
And we're
construction.
looking at this project's close to $60 million, correct?
It is,
Okay.
yes.
All right, so it's detailed, I could see, Chris. Anything else that you want to add before I ask?
Well,
Ken?
we also, during that preliminary design phase, especially for South Valley Parkway, we worked with the community. There was a pact, a public advisory committee was developed. So when we were developing those 7 alignments, we worked with the committee to also work with them to see which alignment was most favorable in reality. And ultimately, as we're doing all these studies and everything, our ultimate goal in preliminary engineering is to get our environmental clearance. And once we achieve our environmental clearance, it's basically the green light that says that we can finish designing this project. You know, we're not going to adversely impact something in the environment, but if we do, we know that we're going to do a mitigation plan. So once we get to that, then we're able to jump right into final design.
So fascinating.
But for projects like South Valley Parkway, which was, you know, it took very many years
Yeah.
to go through all these studies and alignments and changes and rework and right sizing and to get to the project.
So you
that-
do
that
nothing,
are out
as I
there.
said. You just
Exactly,
sit around
right.
and do nothing. Karen Mervine is a consultant for PennDOT. Karen, you could probably spend 4 hours with me and what you do. So specifically, what do you do as a consultant for PennDOT?
Well, I'm considered like the administrative assistant to the inspector in charge, which is Michael Bernetsky. He's a PennDOT employee. And then Michael Baker, we're the consultant firm that was hired to watch over the project to foresee that everything goes according to specifications that PennDOT sets. So if the contractor, they have to use, say, for instance, steel that's made in the United States and not from China. So I have to make sure that I have all that paperwork, because if a state audit or a federal audit I have, they come in and they're looking for that paperwork, I have to be able to prove I have a certificate of compliance for certain materials, for everything from steel to nuts and bolts. Has to be accounted for. Everything must be accounted for that I put onto an estimate to be paid. So, like for instance, okay, our project is $57.2 million. And as of right now, we're 80% complete with the project. The project wasn't supposed to be completed until August of 2020, but we're anticipating at least a 2 to 2.5 year early finish of this project. On the project, we have the prime contractor, Krieger Construction, and we also have 39 subcontractors.
Wow.
Yes, and of 5 of those, they're DBE, minorities, for the project. So there's a lot of, like, people don't understand, you think it's just one contractor. No, there's subcontractors. And then, you know, you have just different things like that, you know, that come into play.
So basically, as we're seeing, there's a lot involved,
Yes.
you know, in detailed information that the public does not know when
Yes.
these particular projects are done. Then there's the environmental impact, but there are also the rewards of bringing revenue into the different areas that you're doing.
Well, and one of the first ways we do that, and maybe Chris, you can talk about this, is through eminent domain, and that sort of has a negative connotation. But you know, anytime that we go in, like with this project, we're building a brand new road, so we have to work with the Luzerne County Community College, and you know they have some land. Who else? You said there were how many different organizations?
There's about 18 different entities that we had to acquire right away from for this project.
So, folks, if you tuned in, we're talking to PennDOT officials, and we're talking to the contractors. There's a lot involved, as you can see, in all these projects. But remember this: one key thing is that, you know, when you see these people on the highways, please, you know, please slow down, okay? Because sometimes you're involved working and you forget, you know, you're in a project, particular people working, you know, and you may step back or do something, and here's a guy or woman flying down, and we've seen some sad cases on PennDOT, so we want to protect the people who are working.
And if I can add to that,
yeah.
slow down and put your phone down.
Yeah.
We see more and more people going through work zones on
Yeah.
their cell phone.
Especially when they're slowing down, they think they can have
Right.
a chance of
They-
going.
that's it's
Yeah.
for whatever reason, that's when they pull it out oftentimes, and it's very, very dangerous.
Well, listen, thanks for coming on the show. We're going to have the contractors come on and project. We have Shelley, we have we have Shelley, and we have Frank, and we have Mike. We'll let Frank tell you what his last name is because it's an interesting name. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show. Remember, 24/7, you can watch all of our shows, ssptv.com. Remember, in the Pottsville area, Comcast 190. In Wilkes-Barre, the Channel 92, and 190 in Scranton. And, of course, here in the Greater Hazleton area, Channel 513, our HD channel, and Channel 13. Remember, all of the local neighborhood shows are on the app, SSP TV. Search SSP TV, download them. All the shows are on there, folks, and we appreciate all the great comments. Now, today, folks, we're learning about a lot of projects on PennDOT. I was just telling the group here before on break, we could probably spend a couple hours on the information. It's just so detailed, interesting information. So I'm trying to get the surface here, trying to get some highlights. Now, joining me is going to be Shelley Alexander, who's a project director. We have Mike Dixon, who is highway inspector, and we have my buddy Frank. And Frank, you're a good Lithuanian Polish, and how do you say your last name?
Grishka.
There you go, folks. You thought I was going to get tongue-tied on that one. Let me start with you, Kelly. You're one, Shelley, okay. Shelley, you're one of the project managers, okay? So tell me what you do.
Okay, well, I work with a project management team. We start out from before the bid process, and before a job goes out to bid, we walk a job, we familiarize ourselves with the job, the plans, everything. We take everything into consideration, all the materials, the subcontractors. We have to do all of this just to come up with a bid. So
you work for the contractor?
I work for Krieger Construction.
Okay, all right. So now you're going out there getting all of the necessary information before you bid.
Before you ever bid, we have to do a complete takeoff on quantities, what our cost is going to be, and that's a time-consuming process, just to determine what you can do the job for.
Yeah.
I came on the South Valley Parkway after it already started as a project manager, and there's several other project managers, and we have about 70 or 80% of our work is PennDOT work, right, Frank?
Yes.
So that is all done before anyone picks up a shovel. We solicit our subcontractors. It's all in the contract, specific if we have DB commitments, which is disadvantaged business enterprise like Karen touched upon before. But we have to follow the design. We don't
You have a blueprint then?
It's all designed by Borton Lawson, this particular job.
Right.
So our job is to follow their design.
Okay.
And PennDOT specs and PennDOT's design.
You're talking about a close to $60 million project here.
Yes.
Yeah. How come you don't have all gray hair?
I do. I just got it colored yesterday.
No, I mean it's detailed. I mean, what's your background?
My degree is in petroleum natural gas engineering, so I switched to heavy highway and bridge construction.
So then so Frank, you're the superintendent for the project, okay?
Yes, sir.
So what do you do?
It's my job to complete the job on schedule or before schedule, hit mile markers such as the day we're supposed to be finished in August of 2020 compared to we're hoping to hit a milestone of 2 years ahead of schedule. So it's my job to organize, schedule, and complete the project.
So when you're doing one of the project engineers, do you establish that, or do you have an idea it's going to take 3 years, 4 years? Where the timetable comes? Because he just said
there's
he's
phasing and sequencing, and that's done by the design firm.
Okay.
Sometimes we're able to combine phases. We have progress meetings every 2 weeks, and PennDOT's represented there, Krieger's represented there, subcontractors are there, Borton Lawson is there. And as a group, we can determine if we can combine phases to shorten the time, which is how we're able to do this job faster than expected.
So Frank, you're the superintendent. You're making sure that you're following all the specs and you're working with subcontractors, correct?
Yes, we have 39 subcontractors that have worked with us or are still working with us. that's all in scheduling them to come in as we're working, work with them, or work ahead of us. It's very complicated. A lot of coordination. It's very complicated in such a large job, and this job is stretched out over 1.9 miles from one end to the other. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on.
So Mike Dixon, as a highway inspector, okay, you work for the PennDOT or you work for?
For Michael Baker International. It's a consulting firm
Okay.
that
And so what do you
PennDOT
do?
hires.
What do you do then in terms of this project?
PennDOT has a spec book that is about that thick,
Yeah.
and it has to do with every phase of construction, anything, no matter what they're doing. And we have to make sure that the contractor is following that spec book.
Okay. So do you work with Frank?
Work with them, yeah.
So you
I
come
watch
in and
him.
make sure that
I make sure Frank knows that Frank's doing it right.
Okay. So Frank, it's a major accomplishment to get this done 2 years earlier. I mean, I would think.
We're a very aggressive company, and in anything we do, number one, number two, we put forth a lot of extra man hours, a lot of overtime. A lot of the guys,
Okay.
we worked some winters.
We talked about, so sometimes as people are going down the highways and they're seeing these construction, and of course they're frustrated because they have to back up and traffic's backed up, etc. But then sometimes you pass and you see 7 guys, okay, or some women, and 5 of them are standing around and maybe 2 are working, okay? And you're saying, well, what are we paying these people for? Should they be doing something? Explain what's actually happening.
Well, there could be a couple different things going on. We could be lifting something, and then we allow the traffic to go through after we're done lifting it, so they're standing there. Or there could be a couple inspectors and some engineers checking the project out as we're building it.
Yeah.
We're hired, and we do the job as a bid. So if the contractor is just standing there doing something, they're losing money on their own time.
It's not PennDOT.
No, it's not
PennDOT says,
PennDOT.
okay, and I only say this because, I mean, I my father had a trucking business, so I know when you have people, there's sometimes, everyone's doing something, okay? Just sometimes, so people understand that they are doing something, they just waiting for us.
They appear like they're watching, but they're not.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
watching for a reason.
Yeah, very interesting. And now we have here something that you showed us, Mike. This is, and Sammy put it, it's a bat.
It's a bat habitat. If you're driving 29 northbound and you look up on the hill, you'll see a couple of them built.
And why
that's
did they build this?
for the bats to hibernate in
Okay.
and to hang out in, I guess.
So some people think bats, they get nervous with bats. I do anyway, but they serve a great purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So when you're driving 29 northbound, imagine there's lots of people and I've had people say, I don't know what those are, and then that's what they are.
yeah, that's what.
And they were specifically put there just for the bats, and it was a real chore. Frank was very time consuming.
Consuming to build.
To build this.
Yes, and we were actually videotaped from the start of the morning till the time we finished every night for about a month and a half to build them. So
We got about 2 minutes left. What do you think you want to convey to the public in what, learning about different projects, Frank? Anyone, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, like I was said before, everybody has families to go home to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to be patient. If it takes you 5 extra minutes to go home, that's better. It takes you 5 extra minutes to go home than me not going home.
Well, I could just, and I'm not saying this because you're here, okay? I think, you guys do a fabulous job, really. I mean, when you look at the state of Pennsylvania, I think we're very fortunate to have the people and the contractors that we have that are working on the highways, okay, and taking care of them. And, you just hit it on the head, Mike, we all have to get home, et cetera, but you're making the roads safer, you're making them a lot better, you're improving communities, and I think that's so very important. But I'm excited, Shelley, as to how this thing evolves.
It's a process, and we work as a team, not just at
You
Krieger.
have to.
We work as a team. We're the prime
Except for
contractor.
Chris. Chris doesn't do that much.
We work as a team with PennDOT. We work with our subcontractors. we also have to coordinate utility companies.
Oh boy, that's a
And
challenge.
sure, because all these subcontractors and utility companies, they don't just work for us. They have a lot of other things going on. So we have to coordinate schedules between all of these people at the same time. It's not easy. The paving companies, utilities, if the Olympics are on, the cable company isn't going to let us
Yeah.
cut service.
Well,
You know, it's a lot of coordination and a lot of teamwork with Michael Baker and our consultants and PennDOT in order to get it done together and on time with the right quality. We're not going to finish early because we cut corners. We're going to finish early because we worked harder and longer, extra time. We follow all the specs. We turn in certificate of compliance for every single, the paint that goes on the line.
Wow.
Has to go through stacks of paperwork of testing from Valspar or whatever. I just turned in 302 pages of testing for guide rail.
God bless you. Well, anyway, folks, I said this show could go on for another 2 hours. There's so much involved in these projects, and I want to thank all of you for coming on the show. I'm going to bring James May back and be specifics. Now, if you have any questions about this particular show, my email is sam, S-A-M, at ssptv.com. You could just ask me some questions about this. We'll try to cover some of the general questions. But this project is such a great project, and congratulations to you and your company doing a great job, great job. Remember, download the app SSP TV and you watch all the shows 24/7. We'll see you next time.